In today's video, I want to go over the Woodpeckers In-Dexable, specifically the 6-inch square. Why on earth is this $100? Is it worth it? What are the features? What is the selling point of this absurdly expensive square? Now, I received this as a gift. There is no universe in which I would ever spend $100 on a square unless I won the lottery. So I didn't personally have to make the choice, but I want to tell you what I think now that I've had it and I've had a month or two to use it. All right, the first thing that really sticks out about the In-Dexable, and the thing that really shocked me a little bit when I got my hands on it, is the size. For reference, this is a PEC 6-inch square. This is the In-Dexable 6-inch. This is actually 6 3/8 inches. It's a little over 5 this way, and it's about 1.5 inches this way. So immediately right off the bat, you have a significant weight difference and a significant size difference that you have to think about if you want to carry this in your apron. This is not a small pocket square, in my opinion. It just barely fits into one of the pockets on my apron, and it's also something to consider in your hand. It is quite large, and it is a little bit hard to manipulate if you're used to doing things with just one hand. For reference, this is the PEC, and I'm an adult male. I have relatively slightly above average size hands. Again, size of this versus the size of this cannot be overstated. Now, when you're getting a square that is $100, nearly 3 times as much as this, maybe a little more, you're looking for significant upgrades, things like fit finish, things that, give you a quality of life use. Now, of course, this was perfectly square out of the box. I checked it with my engineering square, but so is this. And this is one of the blemished ones from PEC, so it's even cheaper than their normal ones. Now, there are some clear feel kind of usage differences. The first is that the locking and unlocking mechanism on this is just super smooth, super nice. It's very noticeable. This is a much harder knurling. It's got a much tighter spring feel to it, so that when you're loosening and unloosening, you have to put a little more effort into it. This can just be done with one finger very easily. So there's a real big difference in the feel of the loosening and tightening mechanism. The next thing we're going to look at is the edges of these. Now, this is not, it's slightly beveled. It's like someone took sandpaper and rubbed over it once. This has got a full softening bevel to it. It's soft. You're never going to poke yourself, cut yourself, anything. It's just incredibly smooth. The smoothness of this is unbelievable too. However, this is not bad. Now, one big feature you'll notice differently, and the reason they call this the In-Dexable, are these cutouts here, much like an Incra T-square. Now, for comparison, here is the 6-inch Incra T-square, which has little holes for a 0.5 millimeter pencil at every 64th, 32nd, 8th, it's got everything. This has openings at every 16th of an inch, so nowhere near as finely detailed as this, but it's got your general measurements here. And of course, you've always got your normal square action for those odd spaces that you would like to reach. One interesting thing about the In-Dexable is that due to these 1-inch indexing, it slides really smoothly on this side, and this button is used to find the hole. But if you turn it the other way, it catches because there's a spring lock in here that wants to push it back, or at least it feels like a spring. So sliding it this way, you almost need to push on the knurled knob a little bit to get it to slide better. If you just have it like this, it wants to catch on these indents. This side, absolutely no problem, slides smooth. So that's just something to consider, and obviously you can flip this around as you wish to use it. Now, one of the nice features about this is when you're tracing over wood, you've got this wide base that sits on the wood. The In-Dexable has this nifty little feature that slides out on both sides that will hold the piece or hold the square onto a board as you go across. It's incredibly useful, and I find myself using it for basically everything. And it's kind of needed because this is so heavy that it wants to just tip. I don't want to say that they created it just to solve that problem. They may have done this intentionally, but it sort of is needed if you want to have this on an edge of something and not have to worry about this sliding right down. Now, for reference, this is how they both sit. This has the width holding it on, and this has this. If I take that off, right down. Now, that's obviously going to happen with your normal square too, right? But with this, you can relatively easily move it with one hand. This becomes a little harder due to the size. You need a few more fingers on there, and it becomes a little easier to tip while you're trying to hold this weight. But of course, they did add this, so it's incredibly efficient and useful, and it holds itself perfectly. Now, one thing we'll look at here is the distance of the indexable button that sticks out, because if you're using a thin piece of wood and you want to rest this on the side, it's going to hit the bottom. Now on this side, you've got a 1/2 inch between the bottom of this and the ruler, I guess I'll call it itself. On this side, you've got about 5/16 of an inch. On this, you've got about 3/16 of an inch on either side. So you could sit this on a 1/4 inch board and not have to worry about it hitting the bottom. Whereas with this, you're not going to be able to sit this on a 1/4 inch board because this is going to be hitting whatever you are, whatever table surface you're using. So if you use very thin pieces of wood a lot, consider that it's going to be an issue. It will hit the desk and not stay on the wood flat. And I think too, this gives another idea of just how massive this thing is, right? We can put this on there and you can see just how gigantic this square is, which I like, but I also find it nowhere near as comfortable to just slip into a pocket. And again, if my apron didn't have the pockets it did, I probably wouldn't be able to carry this around with me. But that's something we'll come to in a second, the ability to carry it around. All right, so let's talk about the indexing nature of this. And that is one of the big features, is that these are at every inch. And the reason this is at 6 1/4 is to index off of the bottom on this side. This is not 1 inch, it's about 1 1/4 inches, a little over. So you need a ruler that is 6 1/4 inches. If you were to index it off of this side, you will now still be at exactly 5 inches between here. You know, it's just a required feature to get the distance here to be 5 inches, that this has to be 6 3/8 of an inch. One thing I think you have to ask yourself when you're looking at this in the indexable feature, and they, as far as I can tell, do not sell one that is just a standard. I believe their double squares are only in this indexable model. And if you were thinking about buying it for that reason, how often do you use exactly 1 inch graduations, right? It's very handy to have exactly 1 inch there and so on, but how often are you going to use that? You know, for me, I use it occasionally, but most of my measurements are not in exact 1 inch graduations. But where I really like that indexable feature is if I want to, you know, check whether something is square, I just know exactly where the 0 is, so that when I stand something up to check 90 degrees, I know that this is not going to be sticking out a little bit and interfering with my exact 90. Now, one of my main criticisms of this is the finish. This is clearly covered in machining marks. Now, whether that's something that can even be gotten out, I don't know, but you can still see the little round head from the CNC mill that would have cut this. It's all over the place, and it's on this side too. I don't want to say it's unprofessional, but it's not what I expected out of something that costs $100 for this thing to not have a uniform color. Strange, maybe not their fault, and doesn't matter at all in terms of using it, but I was just a little surprised that this looks so rough in here. Now, one benefit to this really huge base is you get more reference surface if you are checking your tools for 90 degrees, and also it doesn't tip as easily. You can push that thing and it won't tip. Whereas if you get that guy, it's going straight over. Maybe not a big deal, but something I like, that I can set this up next to a tool. I can have a lot of reference area to check for 90 degrees. However, the size of the 6 inch is probably not what you'd be looking for if you wanted to use it to check the squareness of your tools. For that, in general, you'd use something more like a machinist square, which is just permanently affixed, because with any double square, One thing you have to think about over time is the more you slide this, is it going to come loose at all? Now, that's also one benefit of the indexes is that you can lock it directly in there. Even if there's a little bit of wear and tear over many years down this middle part, it will always lock at 90 degrees in these indexes. With something like this, wear and tear over years, and you can see how much harder, even when I really loosen that up, to move that is. Now, I love this PEC square. I would still be using it had I not got this, and I still use it for many things where I just want to carry something smaller. But you can see trying to move that along, and this is quite loose. You just get a bit of friction. With this, if you have it the right way, no problem whatsoever. Just sliding in and out, one little turn tight, it's going nowhere. We're now going to talk about these little indents here and using it to trace lines, as the idea is that you get an index point for every 1/16 of an inch. So you can simply stick a pencil or a pen in there, pull it along, and boom, your line is perfectly square to your edge. Now, obviously, that's something that's very important, is that your edge has to be square, jointed, straight, I guess is the best word for that as well. But that's not for the tool to do, that's for you to do. But it works relatively good for that. The only problem is that unlike the Incra, which has incredibly fine, fixed areas, there's nowhere else that can go other than in that hole. This is actually a bigger kind of hole. If you were to hold it to one side or another, you may not be exactly square. You can see the amount of movement within that. Now, the one benefit of that with this is that you can use many different sizes of pencil. This is 0.05 or 0.5 millimeter only. With the Indexable, you can use more standard pencils and even pens, whereas with the Incra, if you like the tracing feature, you have only one option, 0.5 millimeters. With the Incra, you can stick your pen in there and easily get a pen line. Now, that's absurdly thick because it's a pen, and I don't know if that's going to help you, but if you need a rough line, you can use a pen. And likewise, you can use a standard number 2 pencil as well and get your line. So you have a lot more options in terms of what writing marking material you use. All right, the next obvious use of a square, well, the main use of a square is to draw a 90-degree line. Obviously, again, that's going to come down to how well your edge is straight and jointed. But this is one interesting thing with the bevel on this, is that it's not relevant if you have a thicker pencil or a pen, but when you start getting into something small, that can slip under the bevel versus that. And you can see it's just slightly thicker than the single line. I hope you can see the difference between those two. So when you're marking something out, if you want to go over it twice, and if it's very important to have exactly that thickness line, you have to remember how you were holding your pencil before. Because if you accidentally come in twice, you're going to get a thicker line than you would with doing it only once. Again, the precision in woodworking is not down to the thousandths of an inch of a line. If you're using this, you'd be using something more like a marking knife for that. And the marking knife, of course, rides at 90 degrees anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. With the marking knife, you're never going to be going in at some angle. You're always going to be up against there. So, no concerns with the bevel there. And you've got a nice big reference surface for the marking knife with this as well. But like I said, if you use one of these, just be mindful that you can do two different markings and not be quite as precise. So this is a good way to see how this works, right? You've got this really good balance in that it can't go left or right over at all. And that's extremely useful when you are marking based on the end here. The ability to one hand this across like so. That prevents you from needing to hold all your weight over here, potentially causing this to rock. You just keep this pushed in and it will stay flat on its own. With the PEC, for example, we need to make sure that we are up against it and we're holding it and we're never coming out from the line. We cannot let this slip at all. All of our weight has to be placed here and then up against here, whereas with the Indexable, you just have to press it up against. Now, again, not the biggest deal in the world, but if you're going to pay $100, it's a nice little feature. In terms of accuracy, the PEC matches with the Woodpeckers, which matched with my Stare ruler in terms of the length. So there were no concerns with this or with this in terms of being accurate in the length and in the measurements. Now, one thing I will say about the measurements are that the PEC feels like there's actually a little engraving kind of there, like they've cut out a little section and then made it black. This, if it is, it's so minor that I can't feel it. Now, is this going to wear off over time? I highly doubt it. It's probably laser etched in there, if I guess, if that's a thing on metal. But the fact that these are little indents means that if the coloring somehow ever wears out of the line, you always know exactly where that line is. Or if this were to somehow rub off, again, if that's possible with this, you would have no way of knowing exactly where that measurement is. All right, so let's say for the sake of comparison, I'm trying to get exactly 2 inches to come out. How quick is it with either of these? Well, with the Indexable, due to the inches, I just move down, I click, and because this pin is offset 3/8 of an inch, I believe I said 1/4 earlier, I apologize for that. This is now exactly 2 inches, even though this reads 6 3/8. Now with this, you got to slide. You're looking for your line. You're looking to just cover the line. There's 2 inches and I'm 2 inches out. Again, we're talking about seconds here, but if your vision's bad, if any kind of dirt or dust, anything like that, you're looking for that little line. You're going back and forth just a little bit, and eventually you get there. Now I want to immediately go to 3 inches. Indexed, boom, 3 inches. That is one of the big features, one of the big selling features of the Woodpeckers In-Dexable. Now, Woodpeckers does sell, I believe, a 3 or a 4 inch of this and a 12 inch. I can't imagine how heavy that 12 inch must be. But if 6 inches is a little too large for checking 90 on some tools, and I personally prefer this 4 inch machinist square for that, but let's say you just want one to do it all. 6 inches is a great standard to be able to do measuring and marking, but it is a little big for certain machines, like a bandsaw. If you're trying to check your blade at 90 and you've got a benchtop bandsaw, this is probably going to be too tall. You probably do not have 6 3/8 inches of resaw capacity on a benchtop bandsaw, so this wouldn't work. You would still need one of these slightly smaller to check for square on things like a bandsaw. You know, it's fine on a table saw. And so far I love it, but I'm not convinced it's worth $100. Okay, so I just want to show you now trying to fit this thing into a pocket. For me, I like to store my square in this guy right here. Now with this, it basically has to be set at this, and it goes in sideways and it just barely fits in there like so. Now, you know, it's pretty big, but I've never had it fall out, but it doesn't fit as well like this. It doesn't want to go down as easily. Becomes a little harder, got to shove it in there. For reference, here's the PEC. It's in there. The PEC in this pocket, gone. The PEC in this pocket. Well, there's a bunch of other stuff in that one. But you can see, much easier to just drop it in there. Whereas with this, I guess I can do this one-handed, but it's nowhere near as easy, and it's heavy. And if you're holding something here and trying to fish around to get it in your pocket, it's going to be a bit of a problem. I actually tend not to carry this with me a ton, mainly because I'm terrified of dropping it. It's $100. There are not many things that are $100 or more than a phone, I guess, that I would carry around with me and have it risk coming out and falling. Now, it never has fallen. It stays in there really well, partially because it's so tight. That is something I do worry about with the cost of a square like this. So in summation, is this worth it? Well, for the cost of this, you can get the Incra at about $25, the Gross 4 inch at about $25, $30, and the Blemish PEC at somewhere between $30 and $40 when I bought. So you're essentially looking at the cost of these three together for this, including taxes. Now, this is nice and fixed. You never have to worry about any kind of wear and tear. This will always be 90 degrees, but it's obviously useless as a ruler other than the exact 4 inches. This is smaller. It doesn't have the nice little resting pin. It's not as nice to use. It's a little tougher. It's a little bit more annoying to get this ruler in and out. But again, 35, something like that, dollars for the Blemish. It's got your graduations all the way up to 64ths, great. And of course, if you're looking for precise marking, the Incra is going to be better than the Indexable because it has 30 seconds and 60/4. So I think Woodpeckers is trying to make the ultimate square here, but they are lacking in the sense that it's impossible to cut this many holes into this thing and not have it fall apart. So you have less options of measuring lines, but it is perfectly 90 degrees. So you've got the machinist square all together and dealt with. You don't have to worry about a separate machinist square if you don't want to. And it does everything the normal double square does. And I'd say it feels much better to use. It's much nicer to have the indexing line wherever you want it. And overall, the finish, the feel, I guess I should say, the feel is very nice. There's no sharp edges, nothing. It's just very comfortable. Though, of course, the finish, I don't love this. Had I paid the price of maybe a blemished version, I would have been much happier with this kind of finish in there. Totally irrelevant to how it's used. I'm just a little surprised that from such a high-end company like Woodpeckers, that the finish would look so dirty. Now, what I will say is that if you prefer this more traditional style, somebody like Starrett is going to probably be the more appropriate option for you. This is a very unique double square and is kind of, trying to, I don't want to say reinvent, but kind of bring something new to the measuring world. I appreciate that. I'm extremely thankful that the person who got me this got me it. I have to somehow figure out a gift that's going to equal this next year, which is not going to be easy. But overall, would I trade this for all three of the other ones? No, I wouldn't trade it for all three of the other ones because I use these 64th markings all the time. And I also like to have this just sitting in a box so that I know it's never dropped, it's never dented, it's never anything. It's always at 90. Now, I certainly like this more than I like this, but the functions of these other two are just better at what they do, or at least in this case, I can keep it more, safe and protected than this. So if you're trying to buy one square and you're okay with having a little less function than all of these three combined, great. It is about, $10, $15 more in price for all three of these, depending upon if you have to pay shipping or not. Worth $100. I don't think so. Unless you're rich or you have plenty of money or you have nothing else to buy in terms of woodworking tools. After seeing the cost of this and seeing a bunch of other woodworking YouTubers, I'm kind of stunned at how much money they must have paid to have their wall of woodpecker tools. Now, if somebody gave me other ones as gifts, I'd be thrilled. But I do not think this on its own is worth $100 compared to the options of these three and having this be better at marking than this, just simply due to the number of options and having this be able to be perfectly square, perfectly 90. You don't use it for anything else. You just keep it in its case, leave it alone. It's always ready to go. And then the final thing is, like I said, it's terrifying that this thing costs $100, and if you drop it, you could ruin it. I really do just keep it on the wall. And with the Woodpeckers square, and I imagine with all of their squares, you get this steel holder and two screws to put it into the wall, and it perfectly fits whatever size square you have. It's even got cutouts on both sides, so if you are putting it in one way or the other, it works. This is a really nice feature. Obviously, you could make your own out of scrap wood for next to nothing, which I would have done had it not come with this, but it's a nice little touch. And because it's got the cutouts on either end, if you for some reason left that out, it would still sit flat in there. It's not going to be stuck tipping like that. Cool feature. And, that also locks it in there if you want. Nice little addition, not necessary. You can make it yourself. And if they were willing to take $15, $10 off the price to not have this, I would not have this included. I'd pay less money for it.